I'm Jordan Zachar, I am the editor and publisher of Progress Report, a newsletter about progress in politics. And I am very glad to be joined, as people are going to be. It's funny, I do this introduction really before people start joining. Here we go. Because later on, we post the whole video, and so it looks like people don't. Anyways, point is, I'm here with Malik Karos. She is a lawyer and barista and student and activist and person, most of all running for Congress in Colorado, in Denver. And I'm really excited. She's gotten a lot of buzz of late. I've been following the campaign for a while, and I feel like it incidentally reached out, and then all of a sudden you were like the anointed one at the convention, so in the caucus. Um, but yeah, so thanks for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat. It has been very poppin' in the last couple of weeks. It's been really, really busy. And it's funny, but we've been in this race for 9 months.
Right.
It was a real slow start, but um, you know, persistence and making sure we're getting the message out, and we're starting to see that Denverites are getting ready for a new generation of leadership.
It's interesting, like and I'm gonna ask you all about your background, but like in just mentioning you've been in for 9 months, you start and like it starts slow, and like how do you know if it's going well or not? Because like it's one of those things where you worked on a campaign before, like you're not nobody, like you got connections, but like how do you know it's like, oh, this is actually going well, and like you start building momentum. So it's almost feels like has to like watching something growing beneath the surface, and all of a sudden it like blooms.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the biggest thing that I took away from my last experience on a campaign was that you have to make sure that you're not in a bubble. And if things aren't as going as well as like you would want, you need to know that, and you need to be able to make changes and adjustments to make sure that your message is resonating with voters and that you're reaching voters to have those conversations. And so, but the slow start in the beginning was expected. I
Mm.
have no name ID. I've not held political office before. I'm not independently wealthy, so I wasn't going to be able to pay for the ads right out of the gate. It was completely organic what we were able to build from the beginning, and I knew that it would take 9 months to be able to get to
Yeah.
some place like this, because we would be working from nothing at the start. And so, being really intentional is a big piece of that. Why am I running?
Mm.
And making sure that the choices that we make match that why. And all my why is that I just think Denverites deserve a real representative who's fighting for them and not for their donors. And that always brings you back to how the campaign should be run, how you should be reaching donors on a daily basis, being creative and scrappy with the resources we are lacking in compared to some of our corporate counterparts, and just being creative in that way.
Yeah, I mean, so tell us a little bit about yourself. I know, like, you have an interesting background in the sense of like how you ended up in politics, but like, what is your because you were working in a law firm and doing not politics, and then you kind of you can tell the stories better like that.
No, for sure. Yeah, it's funny. I've always been pretty politically just involved and wanting to I wanted to use my law degree when I decided I wanted to become a lawyer was because I wanted to do something related to policy. Having been the daughter of immigrants and watching what it looked like to achieve the American dream,
Hmm.
I knew that all that had to do with the laws in place, right? And a lot of immigrants will get you got lawyer, doctor, engineer, pick one. And for me, it was lawyer, and I felt like that's the place where you could have the most impact and the most meaningful, um, you know, difference for working people and immigrants and marginalized groups and all the things. And so I went to law school, and then I think like a lot of other lawyers learned almost too much about the system, in a way that was really, really disappointing and frustrating. And you get to a point where you realize, oh, the system's not broken; it's actually working exactly as it was intended to. And understanding that what would require the kind of meaningful legislation that you'd want to see, and like Medicare for all, universal childcare, would require a complete overhaul of how we do politics and how we run government and how we structure our economy. And so I, like many Gen Zers, was just like, cool, we're cooked. called it a wrap and said, there's nothing I can do as an
Sure.
individual, and said, okay, I'm going to go work for a big law firm so I can pay off this mountain of debt I just
Right.
accumulated, help my parents retire, hopefully, and just sail into whatever this future is going to look like for us because it looks pretty bleak. And then I was practicing in New York after the war in Palestine had started, and it was beginning to look very much like a genocide was beginning.
Right.
And the students were protesting on all the New York campuses, and there were some law students protesting that were also getting their job offers revoked from firms. So I wrote an article that was defending their right to protest, that was
Hmm.
defending their right to criticize the Israeli state, um, and talking about, we cannot allow this conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and the danger that that poses to Jewish people who do not support or approve of what the Israeli government's actions have been as of late. And so I wrote that article. Um, I was asked to take it down by my firm, like many people who had written anything publicly about
Hmm.
the war at the time were. I said no. I'm don't think I mentioned it earlier. I'm an immigrant from Ethiopia, where there was a war there recently that took the lives of 600 to 800,000 civilians. There still has not been as much access into the region to really understand exactly what the scale of that destruction was. And I saw a lot of the same rhetoric, a lot of the same tactics being used in Palestine. And so, having lost family members in that war, I said, no, I can't. I can't take this down. This is the truth. And I refuse to shy away from it. And then the next day I was let go. And that was a really scary moment at the time. And, I'd been working for about a decade up until that point to become a lawyer, and um but it's something that I would do all over again,
Yeah.
especially because in the days following, I was getting messages. I got like over 100 messages from lawyers all across the country, some even in Australia and the UK, that were saying, I wish I could speak out in the same way. But like one person was like, I just found out I'm pregnant. I can't afford to lose my childcare.
Yeah.
My husband just lost his job. We can't afford to lose the income. And so that was really enlightening for me in understanding, okay, the jobs that we have, which are meant to allow us to afford our most basic needs, are also preventing us from holding our government
Right.
accountable. And so what has to change in order for us to be able to hold our elected representatives accountable? And that requires us to have economic freedom, and freedom of access to our most basic needs, which I think are housing, healthcare, nutritional food, and public education. We have that, then we don't have the threat of losing those things, and holding these elected representatives accountable and making sure that our taxpayer dollars are not
Hmm.
funding a genocide. So that was the impetus of me deciding, okay, I need to research this issue a bit more, seeing how much money was always at play and influencing our politics and influencing our economy and everything. I was like, okay, I want to go do a PhD. I'm going to go to CU Denver. I moved back home immediately. This is where I grew up. This is where all my family and friends are. And so I'm at CU Denver doing a PhD in public affairs. I'm on leave of absence right now. So
I was
obviously,
gonna say
this
it's a
is a
lot.
full
It's a
time
lot on your
job.
plate.
Yeah, it was a little much. And then after Trump won, it just felt, um, I I just knew, like I think a lot of people did, that Democrats were not going to learn the right lessons
Hmm.
from that election. And in order for us to really root out the cause that got us Trump in the first place, because
Hmm.
Trump is not the cause, he's a symptom. We would have to overhaul the Democratic Party and root out the corporate influence and the lobbyists and special interests we've seen. That means competitive primaries, and that meant looking in my own backyard to the 30-year incumbent,
Right.
who I have a great deal of respect for, but 30 years is a long time. It's longer than I've been alive. And she's also one of the least effective members of our congressional delegation, even behind Lauren Boebert. And so, This is one of the most progressive districts in the country. It's the youngest district in the country. We have universal pre K, we have term limits, we have publicly financed elections. We should have a representative who not only reflects our values, but is also fighting to bring those onto a federal level. So that's why I decided to run. And it's been 9 months so far, and we've got 3 months to go. And it's been incredibly exciting. Certainly not where I thought I would be a couple of years ago, but
It's
yeah, here we are.
it's crazy, like, I mean, thinking about just to go back to the Israel point, like, as a Jewish person who's not a Zionist, like, there was a lot of, like, silencing of people, right? And, like, now you think about this election and, like, not that it's the number one issue facing you, obviously, in this election, but
Yeah.
it's amazing how far that's come in, like, 2 years, right? Like, 2024, they wouldn't allow a single Palestinian person on the stage of the DNC, and now, like, you've got these people, senators, whatever, like, swearing off AIPAC money and that, which is good, but it's amazing, like, how quickly that turns and how much that was forced by the public and how much they're having to backtrack. I mean, not that you feel, I don't know, is it, like, vindicating in some way? It's like you were on the right side. Like, you already knew you were on the right side of history, but, like, in some ways, you're like, "I was right."
I think it more so is a feeling that advocacy works, right? Like it's not, I think we live in a time where we know that the truth will always come to light. And in some way, shape, or form, justice will prevail. Sometimes it takes decades and centuries, even, but we get there. Um, And the only way to make it happen faster is to advocate for it and to do that forcefully and bravely, regardless of the consequences. And so, um, that's what we saw with the South African apartheid government, right? It was the same thing. It was that increasing pressure that we saw all across the country from all different groups and organizations, to where ultimately the reason why the apartheid government fell is because they ran out of money. And right now we're seeing that APAC is fighting so many fires across the country. The goal is to do the same thing. Like, they cannot fight all these fires all at
Right.
once.
Mhm.
And so, if anything, it was vindicating to know that our advocacy matters, and it's important for us to, not take our foot off the gas.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, and it's interesting to me, like, when someone decides to run. I mean, like, you you decide to do it and, like, you've got some political experience, but it's not like like, you wouldn't think you're the most likely person to do it, right? Just because, like, you weren't in the legislature, you weren't in the city council and stuff, and, like, I mean, that's not disqualifying at all, but, like, what were you like, "Alright, it's gotta," was there no one, were there other people thinking about running? Like, what did you hear from people when you started floating the idea? Because, like, obviously it's great that you we'll talk about, like, it's worked so far, but, like, what gets you to the point that, like, "Yeah, you know what? I actually am gonna do it, and, I should be the one to do it."
Yeah, no, it's really funny because there's a certain level of audacity you have to run for any kind of elected position, and it wasn't my first instinct. I was like, okay, we have, again, like, this is a really, really progressive district, right? And a really progressive state. And so we have incredible folks in the state House and the state Senate and the city council. And my plan was, all right, I want to sign up to volunteer for whoever's going to do this, because this is
Mm,
the most anti incumbent cycle. Obviously, someone's going to
yeah,
run against her. Um, and that just wasn't the case. There is, the incumbency advantage is, I think, still underestimated, right? Like, we're
mm,
talking about going up against the party, we're talking about going up against a decades long incumbent. That's burning bridges. And if you are in an elected position, you have an agenda, you have constituents that you need to be serving, and risking throwing that all away to challenge an incumbent who has wiped the floor with everyone else who's tried challenging her in the past isn't necessarily the calculus that a lot of people want to make. And I think that's understandable. And again, that's a systemic problem where we've created an electoral system where we give so much advantage to the incumbents, even when they're not being effective or, really representing their district well. And so, seeing that there wasn't going to be someone who, had the legislative experience, had the name ID, had the fundraising apparatus behind them, um, I refuse to believe that, no Democrat should be going unchallenged this cycle.
yeah.
No
I think everyone
Democrat
should get
should
a
be.
primary challenge.
Everybody should get challenged. At if anything, iron sharpens iron and it makes sure that we're
Mhm.
stronger getting out into the general. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was like, there has to be a challenge. And if no one else is going to do it, I think I can speak to the issues that matter the most to Denverites, which is that it's too damn unaffordable right now. And the problem is that the system is rigged. Everyone knows this now. And that lack of acknowledgement has been as a real sticking point for a lot of voters, particularly in a city where we value democratic guardrails against corruption so deeply. And so, it was partly, I think I could be good at this. I'm an attorney. I've been in campaigns before. I've been in this world. I've worked on the Denver Young Democrats board and worked to bring young people back into the fold. But it was really mostly about the message, right? And I think
Mm.
that's the thing that's been missing from the party. It's about, what are you actually offering? What's your vision and what's your plan? And does that resonate with the voters?
Yeah, so you're running against Diana DeJet, who's been in office, like you said, like longer than you've been alive. I think she's like a
Mhm.
30-year incumbent or something like that. Um, been in there forever, and so obviously she's had like all the connections right in the district. Like she's an institution. And like safe seat for probably most of her all of her time there. Did you have people who like were in the party or outside the party being like, "Listen, don't do this. Like you're gonna get trounced, or like it's a bad idea to cross, like you said, burn bridges, or um, uh, try to dissuade you."
No. So the thing is, I had people that were like, "This will be a waste of time," right? Like, you shouldn't even bother. The one of the greatest issues that I have with the congresswoman is not only that she hasn't been effective in legislation, but she also hasn't been effective in just being in the district and
Mm,
having, built enough of the kind of relationships that would make it so that folks feel like she really is fighting for us. And that's not to say that there aren't people that do support her and are grateful for her work. And I don't want to pretend like she hasn't done anything, right? In her first, couple of decades, she was a real champion for reproductive justice and environmental justice. But in the last 10 years, there's been nothing. And this is the same 10 years where we were witnessing the rise of Trump and saw the degradation of the first administration, what's happening now, and all the things. And so, um, this is the most critical time that we need to have real leadership. And I think people, largely, the response that I get from most folks is not that they love the congresswoman, but rather that they just expect her to win every time because
mhm.
that's just how things go. And this campaign has really been about giving permission to believe that there is actually a chance that we could get better and we could do better as a district in the representation that we have.
I remember. So I've been doing this newsletter, and obviously it wasn't a live stream for a while, but like I've been doing this some version of this since 2000, late 2017, really 2018 cycle. And I remember interviewing AOC before she was known as AOC,
Yeah.
and she was challenging Joe Crowley, who was just as much of an institution, if not more, right? She's there forever in Queens. And I asked her like, you know, what would you do differently policy wise? Because it's gonna, it was 2018, so Democrats were trying to take back the House and Senate because things were going so terribly. So like, why should people donate money to like what's a safe seat? Like, how is it about approach versus policy? Like, what is like the material difference between you guys? And like, obviously, Joe Crowley had very different politics, and so we were talking about that housing or healthcare. But for you, like, what are the like why focus on a blue seat other than the fact that like that's where you live and like like why should
Yeah, yeah,
people care
yeah.
about a safe blue seat?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic question, right? Because we do really have to prioritize making sure that we take back the House and the Senate. And I'm going to be on the front lines of doing that after we win this primary. But what we really need to be talking about is, I think in the short term, but also in the long term. In the short term, we're talking about 2 years of hopefully having the majority back in Congress and being able to effectively hinder and prevent a lot of the damage coming out of the Trump administration. And what I'm offering, I think, what a lot of challengers are offering across the country is just a creative way to approach that. And so, what we're seeing now is a lot of Democrats playing by the same rules that Trump threw away the playbook for years ago. And things like breaking quorum, things like engaging in civil protests. Like I think so much about the South Korean government and when the president called for martial law a little over a year ago now. And like within an hour or something, the members of parliament had like stormed the military barricades, had jumped over fences, jumped through windows so they could get onto the floor and overturn it. I don't have faith that the current crop of Democratic leadership would do the same or encourage the caucus to do the same. And so
Can't imagine
having
them
that
jumping
kind of
over anything.
exactly. And so that kind of urgency is something that I think this crop of challengers, including myself, are offering, right? Like the stakes are that high. But also in the long term, right? We are in this mess because we have not engaged closely enough with long term strategic thinking in the same way that Republicans have. They've been planning this for like 60 years. Certainly, Trump was, you know, kind of a part of that. He kind of surprised them a little bit there as well too. But I mean, they have been packing the courts. I literally witnessed it myself as a law student at Notre Dame. It's one of the most conservative law schools in the country, which I was not aware of until I had already gotten there and it was too late.
Mhm.
But like I watched like classmates of mine being identified and chosen to get onto this track. And we witnessed the way that they changed the entire regulatory world so that it would be easier for them to be able to maneuver around all of these regulations and consolidate and monopolize in all of these industries. And we saw how they attacked and destroyed our campaign finance laws to make
Yep.
sure that they could buy elections like they're just buying a cup of coffee. And Peter,
Yep.
yes, school boards and gerrymandering, like this has been a sprawling effort for a long
Yep.
time. And we've just not been playing the same kind of game at all. And so for me, in order for us to get to a table where we could sit down as a party and come up with our own strategy, I think we have to first solidify what our values are as a party in the first place and what are we actually offering as a vision. I think we have a 6-year window to solidify that. And I say
Mm.
6 years because I think we'll take back the House and the Senate in 26, right? I think we'll take back the White House in 28. What kind of Democrats we're going to put into power is going to be what matters for what happens in 2032.
Right.
Because if we get to the end of another Democratic presidential administration where maybe legislation is passed and things are effective, because, President Biden was arguably one of the most effective presidents in our
Yeah. For a
history.
while. Yeah.
Um, but did that legislation make a tangible difference in the everyday working person's life? Could they feel it in the cost of their rent? Could they feel it in the cost of their groceries? Could they point at something and say, a Democrat did that for me, so I'm going to vote for
Mhm.
another Democrat in the next election? That's what we have this 6-year window to accomplish so that when 2032 comes around, without doing that, we run the risk of losing to whoever is going to fill the vacuum that Trump leaves behind.
Mhm.
Whether it's by choice, whether it's by virtue of biology, Trump will not be there for 2032.
Yep.
And there's a very good chance that someone just as telegenic, just as charismatic, and probably much more smarter is going to fill that vacuum. And if we don't have a good enough case to make about why we should stay in power by 2032, we will lose again. And it will be far more destructive than even what we're seeing now, which is saying something because we're facing 5 alarm fires. And
Yep.
so this is the case that I'm making, particularly in safe blue districts where we should have the strongest of our fighters at the front lines, not only leading the line on what our democratic values are and what our legislative agenda should be, but also making the case for, not just being anti-Trump, but what we're actually accomplishing for working
Mhm.
people and getting that done. So that's the case that I often make.
Yeah, and you think about, like, we're waiting for the Supreme Court to, end the Voting Rights Act, and, Democrats could have passed something in 2023, 2021, 22, to, but they let the filibuster, get in the way of that, and so, like, like, there were, like you just mentioned, some good things about the Biden administration. Yeah, there was, foreign policy was obviously not one of them, but, to say the least. But, yeah, there were things, but a lot of times, like, you have to wait for it to show up, right? You have to kinda wait for, like, these factories to, green factories, those tax credits and stuff, and so, like, I always say you gotta give people reason to vote, right? Vote for you and not against the other guy, like you mentioned, and so you mentioned childcare, and, I'm in New York City, and, like, it's like so clutch that they're extending that because it's so expensive. And Colorado has a big childcare system as well. Medicare for all. Like, what are the other big structural things that you would like to see happen?
Yeah. So, one of the things that really kind of pushed me into running for this in the first place was um, it's the money in politics piece. And I think we've gotten to a place now where it's become much more of a slogan than it is an actionable item. And what our real plan is to get this done. Talking about reversing Citizens United is necessary, but it also requires a constitutional amendment. And so it's far more important that we're talking about, actually building that progressive majority in Congress to be able to get that done. And one of the ways that we can do that is, I make the case that, at the end of the day, they might have ruined our campaign finance systems. They might have taken over our algorithm so that they could push all of these things onto you so you vote in one particular way, but you still have your vote. You can still take the 2 seconds to look up who's donating to this candidate, what kind of super PACs are behind their campaign, and make the choice to not vote for someone who's in bed with these special interests, regardless of party, regardless of what level of government. Because, as mentioned before, this goes as deep as school board elections. Making
Yeah.
sure that we are not supporting these kinds of candidates has to be for the first step. I think the second step is going to have to be passing some kind of structural reform that I think should be publicly financed elections. So in Denver, and just like in New York City, we have a small donor matching program that can support candidates that are not in bed with these interests. And I adore Zohran Mamdani. We're talking about a once in a generation political talent without question. But we also cannot deny the structural advantage that he had with the
For
$8
sure.
million in city funding, right? Like that's what really changed the game to the
Without
point where by
question.
the end of that campaign, him and Cuomo were spending in parity with one another.
Yeah, he was telling
And
don't
you
he was
had
saying
to
don't donate to me, right? Like he was saying like to an all-star.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so, like, that's when it's a real democracy, right? It's actually a battle of ideas and character than it is about who raised the most money and paid for the most ads. And so that's achievable on a federal level, right? We don't have to have a constitutional amendment to do that.
Mm.
This is an issue that pulls at 90% across party lines. If Democrats were serious about winning, this is an issue that they would champion. And it doesn't have to be the small donor matching program. We could tax super PACs. We could make like there are so many creative ways that we could disincentivize the funding of these different programs while also making sure that we are leveling up the candidates like myself who are not taking that corporate PAC or special interest money. And that's going to be how we can really change the balance of power in Congress so that it's not where it is right now, where it's like over 80% of Congress members take money from corporate PACs. That needs to come down to at least below 50% so that we could really effectively pass something like publicly financed elections. And then we could actually reverse Citizens United, which I do really think is doable in the next 6 to 8 years. Like there is an opportunity here where we don't just win, but we win big and we can win
Mm.
trifectas again with super majorities. Like that's a real possibility. And it's something that folks don't wanna give themselves permission to believe. I get that, I
Mm.
really do, because to have hope is scary and, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't, but, like, I mean, we were all there when Mamdani won that night, like, that's the kind of hope that, isn't just a measure of having belief in something, but having active participation in bringing about whatever that change you want to see look like. And so that's what we're really trying to push for here, and that's the thing that I think could be is actually achievable.
You mentioned Sauron, like he won. It was such a big deal, and no one thought he could do it at first. And like it was just amazing upset. You had an upset to some degree last month at the Denver or the Colorado caucus, and so I think that obviously put you on the map a little bit. But you had to have the people to do it, right? You had to have enough like people backing you to go vote and vote for you. So people who don't know, like Malat won the Democratic caucus for this seat in Congress last year, not last month. I'm sorry. Just the incumbent congresswoman barely made the ballot. I guess 30% she barely made it. You doubled what she got in the 60s. Like incredible, great turnout. And obviously like you'll all be on the ballot in the primary, but it was a big deal. It was a big deal, kind of a shot across the bow. Probably a wake up call to the congresswoman. And so tell me about that. How did that happen? Because that must have taken a lot of organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny because so the caucus and assembly process, we have a mixed primary system in Colorado where you can get signatures to get onto the ballot and you can go through the caucus and assembly process. You could do both just to cover your bases. Um, we were actually just going to go the signature process until like 9 days before the deadline to sign up for caucus. At which point it had been like a month of other campaigns organizing to get people to come out for caucus and assembly. And that's because caucus and assembly is a process that takes place over several days, which
Hmm.
is over several weeks. The county assembly that happened where we won, that took like 10 or something hours for folks that ended up staying the entire time. Um, and sometimes it feels like a test of like, resistance and like how long are you gonna stay a part of this
Right
this
on and
party
willing to.
and it's so it is and it happens on weekends. It happened. The precinct caucuses happened on an evening on a Tuesday, and so it's like it is an inherently anti-democratic process that is difficult for wage workers, for people with kids,
Hmm.
and to be able to participate in this. So it's not entirely reflective of the electorate, right?
Sure.
And we're talking to people that are younger, that are young families, that, are wage workers. That's our base.
Hmm.
And so our thinking was, we're not going to be able to perform in the way that we want to. So we're going to collect the signatures and make
Just
this
in
as low
case.
of a lift as possible for our voters.
Mhm.
Um, but while we were collecting signatures, we kept hearing from folks that they wanted to caucus for us. And we're in a really cool moment right now where we also have some other incredible progressive candidates
Mhm.
running in the state for attorney general, for the U.S. Senate, another challenger going up against an incumbent there. And so there's just been a lot of energy and there's a lot of excitement. And so what is supposed to be an institution that protects incumbents, like we were literally in Diana DeGette's old high school, in the audience were her former classmates that I had spoken with. And, you know, it cannot be understated. Like this was the first time a sitting Congress member ever lost at their
Yeah.
assembly. And, there were folks that wanted to paint this as like a activist takeover and all of the like. And it's like, no, I had people who proudly voted for her for 30 years cast their vote for
Sure.
me instead. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that one, there was deep organizing that happened. And a lot of that was thanks to organizations like DSA, who had just endorsed us,
Hmm.
right before the caucus and assembly process and dove right into helping us organize with voters. And then once people were signed up to caucus, calling them, telling them about the campaign, making sure they understood the real choice that was here between myself and the congresswoman. And then I really think, honestly, I think we walked in probably with like 50% of the votes
Hmm.
to that day. But then we gave our speeches. And I think one of the things that is really important about how we level this fight against corporate establishment Democrats is that we have to make clear that the problem is the system. The problem is the structural mechanisms that have allowed people like the Congresswoman, who did begin talking about a lot of the issues that I'm talking about, and shifted her towards more of this corporate PAC money, this lobbyist money, into being ineffectual. What takes place over that time period? And also talking to a room full of her former classmates, like I have a lot of respect for the Congresswoman. I really do.
Yeah.
30 years of service is no nothing to take lightly. And so I led with that. And I made it about the system. I made it about the laws that are in place that push someone to take interest of their donors more than their own voters. Um, so that's how I made my speech. I made my speech about us fighting against the system together, not making it personal, and giving people hope that what we want to see in the world where you don't get bankrupt because you got sick, without taking a mountain of student debt to go to school, like that those things are possible and we can do it together. And then she went on stage and accused me of lying. And the difference was just so stark. And so after that, that's when we ended up getting 63% of the vote with that day, and she got I think 32, and the rest were undecided. And then the final assembly vote happened a couple of weeks ago. And we were, again, there were more delegates that got selected. This took like over a month, this whole process.
That's why
And
people
by
don't
the
get
final
involved.
vote, yeah. And so we had like 235 people, and there were like 81 delegates of hers that I called every single one of them. And I made
Yeah.
my case. And some of them were like, "I'm still gonna vote for her, but I appreciate that you even bothered to try."
Yeah.
And so we were able to flip a few folks, and we ended up finalizing it with 67% of the votes in our favor.
Wow.
And so, um, it was a long and arduous process, but it was historical, and, I think really gave a taste for what the rest of this primary is gonna look like, because that's how we're leading with our message, that's how we're leading with organizing, making this a place where we're giving people permission to believe that we deserve better and that we could do better, and showing that even in the face of impossible things, we're still able to do these things.
Yeah, it certainly made headlines, right? Like it was a big deal. Winning the caucus against someone who's been in office 30 years or so. Like, and things had, I'm sure, at some point changed. It was lead to like a big influx of grassroots donations, a lot of attention. Like, had maybe more opposition from her campaign or from her special interests that maybe they weren't giving you as much thought as they were before. Like, how has that changed things? I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the headlines have increased, and we're getting a lot more attention on the campaign to the point where um it's funny, I was doing an interview with a local paper the other day at a coffee shop, and like several people came over and like introduced themselves and wanted to sign up and all the things, and it's just like people are so ready. Like 30 years is a really long time, especially for young people, to be excited about something. And, we see the wave that Mamdani started in New York, where it's like, I want that for my city. I want that kind of
Yeah,
energy and that kind of politics. That's what I really believe in. And so, the influx of volunteers has been tremendous. I think we're sitting at around like 2 to 300 right before caucus, and now we're at like 500, and we've got 200 folks knocking on doors every weekend now, and, it really giving people that kind of ownership over the campaign has been really important as well too.
yeah,
The All of the things that we do on a tangible level, are volunteer and handmade, and everybody's just so invested, and a lot of that is just by sheer we just made people believe that it was worth getting involved, regardless of what
yeah,
the outcome was going to be. They actually believe that this is worth it. And that's probably going to be my greatest accomplishment out of all of this, regardless of what ends up happening. But we have also seen the attacks rise, particularly as it relates to the letter that I wrote that got me fired. That at the time, it was funny, even when I had gotten fired. No one could reasonably argue that anything I wrote in the article was anti-Semitic. In fact,
right,
I went out of my way to talk about the rising anti-Semitism at that time, that even continues today, and what we needed to do to guard against that, while also making sure that we were protecting basic human rights in Palestine.
sure,
Um, and still, they continue now, and guarding against that is always going to be a part of this fight, and making sure that we are centering our politics and our messaging and the way we just want the world to look like based around our values, has just always been our North Star. And so, it will only get worse, right? Like, I'm calling for an
you ready
arms
for it?
embargo. I'm calling for taxing the rich. Like, I'm calling for AI data center moratoriums. Like, we know AI, we know APAC, we know all these
Yeah,
different industries are coming into this race.
are you ready for
And we're
that? All
ready.
like the
We're
yeah,
ready. Organized
prepared
people
to
beats organized money every time. And it's just about, out organizing and outworking those powers. Um, and fortunately, we're in a city where people are already fed up with the idea of out of state billionaires and corporations trying to meddle in our politics. And so, yeah, we're ready for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, there's always, even with the Mom Donnie campaign or AOC's campaign, it's like there's these long shots, don't even pay attention to them, don't, but then there's just something that happens that, like, gives people permission to believe. and like this could be legitimate, and then like it almost snowballs from there. It's like because
Yeah.
so much of politics seems inevitable, maybe, switch to incumbency, but then like something happens, and obviously for you, it was probably the caucus or leading up to that, like, but it all of a sudden like once that inevitability goes away, like the game changes entirely. It feels like the ground shifts, and people aren't just like tuned out, and they don't just go to the incumbent because they think that's the inevitability.
Yeah. No, 100%. And that's exactly what we've seen, right? Like I hear from voters all the time that it's like, yeah, I would be happy to have a different representative. Like I don't think she does anything, but like no one's going to beat her. Like she's going to have to retire in order for things to change. And now they've come back and said, "Oh shit, you could win this." And I'm like, "Yeah, with your help, like you got to get involved and participate." And I think that's the thing that also has felt like it's been missing a little bit as well too, right? Like we have been living in an election system where cash is king, and like if you are not everybody just wants a donation. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm also asking for donations. We need
Sure.
resources to run winning campaigns. But the real magic is happening with the volunteers, people that are donating their time and their energy and their ideas and their connections with their own friends and their families and their coworkers and their classmates. The word of mouth has been our greatest asset, and making that the front and center ask of people when they ask like how can I help, it's volunteer, like show up at one of
Mhm.
our events, tell your friend or your family member or your coworker about the campaign, get the word out. Even something as small as just resharing one of our Instagram posts or something like that stuff aggregates, and giving people that permission to say, yeah, well, I did that, like I actually physically did something besides just donated $5, which we still need you to do both. But it really it just hits a little bit different for people to volunteer and actually feel like they're a part of, doing something really big and special.
All right, well, I don't take too much more of your time. But so, last question, like, what is it like? Do you have any like big events or big innovations for the campaign that you're really excited about? You feel like people are gonna like, Zoran had the videos, or the things that you're really excited about, and like you kind of changing the way people do things in campaigning.
Yeah, I think well, I don't know that I would say that it's changing campaigning at scale, but definitely in this district, we have been suffering from none of our elected representatives actually wanting to show up and answer to us. To the point where Bennett just like skipped out on a forum, I think like four forums in a row for the governor's race that's happening here as well too. The congresswoman rarely holds town halls, and if she does, they are very, very screened, and she
Yeah.
will know exactly what kind of question she's going to be getting. And so one of the things that we've been doing are kind of holding like micro town halls. We have this incredible network of a lot of local businesses that are super, super excited about our campaign. We've got bars, bookstores, coffee shops, comic book stores, like all kinds of different places that have been hosting us and organizing these events and bringing in their own bases as well too. Um, and I try and make the format where it's like 30% of me talking and then 70% of it questions, like making me myself available and meeting people where they're at. To not just talk at people, but also to hear from our voters and to hear about the issues that matter most to them. And in that way, our campaign has been evolving and growing and learning, not just from a policy perspective, but also in like
Mhm.
how can we best reach voters that are not going to be able to make it out to canvas for us, but want to be involved in some way. And so, yeah, I would say micro town halls or just meeting voters where they're at has been really, really helpful.
That's awesome. Well, how can people who are whether in Denver or not, how can they find you on the internet?
Yeah. So if you go to kirosforco.com, KIROSFORCO.com, and that's where you can learn about me, you can learn about our platform, you can sign up to volunteer, sign up for texts. Whether you're in person or virtual, we've got phone banking and text banking for people that are remote. And then we have canvassing every single Saturday throughout the city, that started just last weekend. So there's a bunch of ways to get involved.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You have a great night.
You too.